Take it away.
Thank you very much, Nigel. And he's not normally that nice to me. I'm slightly concerned he's been so nice. Uh, it'll never last. Well, can I just also add to the welcome that everyone else has given this morning? It's fantastic to see so many people in the room today. Back in where's Anne-Marie? Back in early summer, we started to talk about this, and we sort of discussed whether it was could we get people to come to the island, in the middle of November? Thought if we got 50, we'd do well. Then we got 80, then we had to increase it to 100, and then the money ran out at 120, so we had to stop there. But we had lots of people and lots of interest, and thank you all who have travelled to be here today. I will try and do this pretty quickly. I know some of you will have seen this before, so forgive me if you've heard this before. But that is where we are working. That's the view from the car park just over there on Bow Island. That was our first project site, so that is sort of the focal point for all the work that we started, as Nigel said, back 10 years or so ago. So I'll not linger on this too long, some of this has been covered, but the project was envisaged by the Lough Erne Wildflowers Council. It built on the previous conservation activities that the associations and the council itself have been involved in. You'll see some duck nest tunnels down the back. The Devonish Wildflowers pioneered the use of duck tunnels locally, really important award-winning work they were involved in. We carry out lots of other conservation activities. You'll see those on the pop-up. So it was built on a long track record. And I'm not sure I'd give Davy, credence for bringing it up. I'd give him praise like that for mentioning breeding waders. But so about 10 years ago, they decided that they would do this work. The desire to help breeding waders was coming from a place that, if you can imagine, we have about 300 members locally, and those guys are on the loch quite a lot. In the wintertime, they're wildfowling. In the summertime, a lot of them will shoot. They'll be acutely aware of the changes that have happened around the loch in the last 30 or 40 years. And one of the most obvious would be the disappearing sound of curlews and snipe in the Fermanagh countryside. So it's great to actually be close to Bow Island doing this. During COVID, I used to do this online all the time, and you were reaching out to the world and people hadn't a clue where Bow Island was. But for the people who aren't too familiar with the geography, we are up here in the northern part of Lower Lough Erne. We chose Bow Island initially because it had a number of things that attracted us to it as wildfowlers for this project. One, it was a unique location. It is an island, yes, but for the last almost 100 years, it has been linked to the mainland via bridges and a causeway. So it is an island, but it doesn't benefit necessarily from the same predator protection you would get from an island that's out in the loch as far, although obviously predators do get to those islands. So effectively it's a mainland site, but not quite. It is critically a farmed environment, and that's what we were very interested in doing, working on a landscape scale on farmland. Because if these birds are to survive, and it's something that'll come back to a lot today, the need to get these birds as an integral part of the working agricultural landscape is critical if we're going to have a future for these birds. The local farming community are absolutely key to what we're doing, and I just like to thank them first of all. Without their involvement and ongoing support, we wouldn't be here today, and more importantly, the birds wouldn't have had the success they've had. So the farmers are absolutely critical to the work we do. And particularly some of the older farmers were aware that these birds had disappeared from their farms. Often weren't quite sure why this had happened, but the birds had gone. But crucially, we had a very small number of breeding waders left here. And as Nigel said, an innovative project involving a range of partners. Again, this is designed for people who have never really heard about waders before. These will not be a surprise to this audience, but a lot of our changes are the same changes that are happening right across Western Europe, causing problems for these birds. Change in land use management is absolutely critical. In Fermanagh, that's really largely associated with the intensification of grassland management, moving away from traditional hay meadows into multi-cuts of silage and all the management that goes around the production of silage. We have a massive issue in our uplands with afforestation. I know Patrick's going to talk about forestry in Galloway in a few minutes. We have, it's not a unique issue, but it's a challenge along the shores of Lough Erne, where farming has actually declined in many of the areas close to the loch. People don't put their cattle down near the loch as much, and scrub has developed. Now that's very good if you're a warbler arriving here from West Africa in the spring, not so good if you're a curlew wanting to nest in a wide open landscape. So counterintuitively, we actually undertake some scrub removal to open up places for these birds. We do have an issue, obviously, again, replicated all across Europe, increased predation as a result of all the changes that have happened in the landscape. So very, very low productivity generally. The climate is certainly having an impact locally, and we are seeking to address both habitat and predation. And I'll not be surprised that if you don't address both those factors for ground nesting waders, you're not going to achieve anything really with them. So it's great to have Andrew in the room, because he was here about 10 years ago now. I think it was 2013. I think it was also not a particularly nice day when we were out and about. It's always like that in Fermanagh, apparently. But we came and we had a look, and we were very keen to get the best possible scientific advice. So GWCT are highly respected for the advice they provide, work closely with farmers and shooters, and we got Andrew's advice at that time. The scrub encroachment was unsurprisingly identified as an issue. We had the loss of the waders from key sites where they had been. Even 4 or 5 years prior to his visit, there had been birds and it just finally disappeared. And then again, the issue, very likely low productivity with any birds that remained. But as usual, the issue is money. So we had to seek some funding. So Nigel was given a little bit of background to how we did that. We, from the outset, were very aware that it was important to have independent monitoring of these birds. One, we didn't know what was happening with them, but also if we were to justify what we were doing to funders in the future, it was really important that we had an independent source of data. So we commissioned Kerry Leonard, who unfortunately can't be here today, but Kerry has undertaken the breeding wader work here, counting for the last 5 minutes, Nigel? 15 will do. For the last 10 years or so. We have now 5 different active farmland sites across the island, up from the initial one, which is where you came out from on the shore, our 4 target species, which would be familiar to everyone in the room, and then our honorary 5th, the sandpipers, which have really loved the work along the foreshore and have really increased a lot in the last 10 years. So that's a really positive thing that has happened that we didn't think would happen at the start. I'll brush over this. Our other one, in terms of habitat, we have restored it in terms of removing the scrub, but also ensuring there's a good sward, suitable sward. You have to go back, and it's an ongoing process. Just because you take away what we call wins, gorse, the first year, they'll obviously come back. But also, we want a mosaic, if you like, of rushes. Those rushes need to be managed. The cattle do a little bit of that. We also have to cut them. We undertake predator management, best practice predator control, primarily, in our case, lethal predator control. Nearly all of it now is undertaken professionally with a little bit of volunteer effort. It's something we'll talk about later, is how you achieve a sufficient level of predator control to actually have an impact. And it's undertaken using the usual tools, mink rafts, multi-catch traps, use of night vision equipment for rifle shooting, etc. So this is the graph I like to show. This is the fun one. So we started out with 5 displaying snipe on the piece of land we have just on the foreshore there, where you come across in the ferry. This has increased this year to about 27. Snipe are notoriously difficult to count, but you can see very rapid increase in the first few years, and then we have sort of, I suspect, reached the carrying capacity of that piece of land. But it's really important that those birds are there now, because they weren't there before, and I suspect there are fairly few sites anywhere in these islands in that time that had that sort of percentage increase. The other one I mentioned is our sandpipers. They were the only other wader species that was present when we started. They have gone from 2 pairs up to a maximum of 12, sitting about 10 this year. The challenge is, we find it, like a lot of other people, very difficult to get curlew to fledge on site. It's a challenge. We've had curlew fledged a couple of times in the time we've been doing this, but the challenge is an ongoing one in terms of, and it's generally a predation issue now, because there's no land management activities that are disrupting them. One of our other challenges is, so you deal with foxes, crows, mink, all of those things. We've attracted the attentions of a pair of peregrine falcons in the last few years, which have been very keen on our curlews on our lapwing. So that's another challenge that we have to try and deal with, but it's not easy, obviously, to deal with that. Very briefly, I might have 2 minutes, Nige. We have expanded into the upper loch, and we have a couple of very important men here at the front from Derrylin and District Gun Club. When we started our work here, we realised there was lots of other opportunities locally to do this work, and we have moved out into the landscape in the upper loch, and Tom McGoldrick is here at the front, and Tom needs a huge amount of praise for his work getting this off the ground. And with a very limited budget, we have seen remarkable increases in lapwing and redshank up there. We also have curlew breeding up there. These birds had basically deserted the islands because the habitat was unsuitable. We intervened and the birds came back. Oh, there's Ashley. Oh, I was going to show my video, but I don't think it'll play, perhaps. I'll show that later on. There, it did play. So this is an example of what can happen We took a little visit up in the springtime. This is a white-tailed eagle being mobbed by lapwing, redshank and curlew. And I always like this as an example of maybe the future of birds in Ireland. We have the reintroduced white-tailed eagle, but also a healthy assemblage of waders on the island to see it off as well. So it's a really nice one, I think, in terms of what can be achieved. We'll cover this in a lot more detail later on, but we reach out in an awful lot of different ways to all these different partners and different levels and different audiences to try and get the message out about what needs to happen with these birds. Lastly then, this is something I'm very passionate about, is community-led conservation, socially embedded conservation coming from below. It's really important that local people have a sense of ownership and understand what's happening. If it's seen as something distant from them and they don't really know what is occurring, it doesn't really become part of their sort of working life in the landscape. So having buy-in from the local community is really important. There are obviously limitations with that in terms of the scientific advice and things. You need to seek support from outside, and also funding is always an issue. And then one of the things we are going to talk about today is achieving agri-environment schemes that actually do the job on the ground in terms of increasing the numbers of these birds. And I'll not labour these, but these are the sort of things we are going to talk about later on, looking at best practice elsewhere, trying to address the issues that exist in terms of predation and other issues, and how do we try to move forward to support farmers to do this. And that is us, I hope. There are our funders, and I would just like, before I finish, particularly thank Elle-Marie and Ashley for all the work they've put in the last few months and in the last couple of days. So if I could just get a round of applause for Elle-Marie and Ashley first before I go off. And now, having not hopefully gone too over my time, I'm going to hand over to Mary, and we shall do that. All right then. Nate, you want to?
Yeah. The check are working.